Imagine you are a Roman soldier. You are one of the most feared fighting men on the planet. You are armed, trained, disciplined. You belong to the greatest military machine the ancient world has ever produced. But right now, you are terrified. The trees close in around you. The path is narrowed to almost nothing. Your formation, built for open fields, designed to crush armies, is useless here. And the screaming from the column ahead of you has not stopped for hours. You don't know it yet, but you are already dead. Welcome back. Today we are talking about failure. Specifically, the kind of catastrophic, civilization-shaking failure that Rome suffered not once, but twice in its long and brutal history. These are not small defeats. These are battles so devastating they changed the course of Western history. We are talking about the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, the single bloodiest day in Roman history, and the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, the disaster that stopped Rome's expansion cold and redrew the map of Europe forever. Let's get into it. To understand Cannae, you have to understand the man who made it happen, Hannibal Barca, a Carthaginian general who, by the time he crossed the Alps with his army and his famous war elephants, had already achieved something most military historians considered impossible. He had marched an army from Spain, through the Pyrenees, across the Rhone River, over the Swiss Alps in winter, and arrived in northern Italy ready to fight. His army was battered, reduced, frostbitten. He had lost thousands of men and most of his elephants to the cold, and yet he would go on to inflict 3 catastrophic defeats on the Roman Republic before Cannae even happened. At the Trebia River in 218 BC, he destroyed a Roman army by luring them across a freezing river in the early morning, ambushing them while their limbs were still numb with cold. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, he hid his entire army, tens of thousands of men, in the fog along a hillside and annihilated an entire Roman force as it marched through a narrow pass. Around 15,000 Romans died in under 3 hours. The Roman Senate was shaken, the Roman people were terrified, and Hannibal was not finished. Hannibal's strategy was not to capture Rome directly. He knew that storming the city was beyond his means without a siege train or naval support. Instead, his goal was to break Rome's alliance network, to peel away Rome's Italian allies by demonstrating that Rome could not protect them. To force a decisive battle, he did something audacious. He raided and captured Cannae, a Roman supply depot in the fertile region of Apulia in southern Italy. The Romans could not ignore this. Their supply lines were threatened. Their allies were watching. Rome responded by assembling the largest army in the Republic's history, 8 legions, plus allied Italian troops, totaling somewhere between 70 and 80,000 soldiers. They marched south to crush Hannibal once and for all. The Roman commanders were 2 consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, experienced and cautious, and Gaius Terentius Varro, aggressive and hungry for glory. They alternated command daily, as Roman custom dictated, a system that was about to prove catastrophically inadequate. On morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, the 2 armies faced each other on the flat plains near the town of Cannae. Varro was in command that day. He saw a simple calculus. Rome had more men, therefore Rome would win. He packed his infantry densely in the center, tighter than standard formation, designed to punch straight through Hannibal's line like a battering ram. Hannibal saw this, and he had a plan. The Carthaginian general arranged his forces in a convex arc, a bulge pushing toward the Romans, with his weaker Gallic and Spanish troops in the center and his elite African infantry on the flanks. His cavalry, numerically superior, was positioned on both wings. When the battle began, the Roman infantry crashed into the Carthaginian center as planned. The center began to give way, slowly, deliberately, by design. The Romans pushed forward, deeper and deeper, compressing into the retreating bulge. They thought they were winning. They were walking into a trap. As the Roman infantry pressed forward, the Carthaginian flanks, those elite African veterans, swung inward like 2 great arms closing around a fist. At the same time, the Carthaginian cavalry routed their Roman counterparts on both wings and swept around to seal the rear. In under an hour, 80,000 Roman soldiers were completely encircled. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. Packed so tightly they could barely lift their weapons, soldiers suffocated, were crushed, or were cut down where they stood. The Carthaginian forces methodically worked inward, killing as they went. By the end of the day, somewhere between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers were dead. Rome lost more men at Cannae in a single afternoon than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War. Among the dead, the consul Aemilius Paulus, 29 of the 36 military tribunes, 80 senators, and hundreds of Rome's equestrian class, the backbone of the Republic's leadership. Hannibal famously collected the gold rings from the dead Roman knights and sent them back to Carthage as proof of his victory. The other consul, Varro, fled the field with around 70 cavalry. He survived. History has not been kind to him. Cannae is studied in military academies to this day, not because of the scale of the slaughter, though that was extraordinary, but because of the tactical genius behind it. Hannibal's double envelopment, the pincer movement that destroyed a force twice his size, became the template for military encirclement strategies for the next 2,000 years. Cannae was the blueprint for Schlieffen's plan in World War I. It influenced Norman Schwarzkopf's flanking maneuver in the Gulf War. Every military officer who has ever studied the concept of encirclement has studied Cannae. But here is the remarkable thing. Rome survived it. The Senate refused to negotiate. When Hannibal's envoys arrived to discuss terms, the Romans sent them away. They raised new legions, changed their tactics, began avoiding open battle, and slowly ground Hannibal down over 16 years of attritional warfare in Italy. Hannibal never took Rome. He won every battle and lost the war. Rome's recovery from Cannae is arguably as impressive as the defeat itself, but the city would not always recover so well. 300 years after Cannae, Rome was an empire. Augustus Caesar sat on the throne of the most powerful state the Western world had ever seen. Roman legions had conquered Gaul, Spain, Britain, Egypt, Greece, Asia Minor, and the Near East. The Rhine River formed Rome's northeastern frontier, and beyond it lay Germania, a vast, dark, rain-soaked expanse of forests and swamps populated by tribal Germanic peoples. Rome had been pushing into Germania for years. Augustus wanted the frontier moved east to the Elbe River, which would straighten Rome's border and reduce the number of troops needed to defend it. The man he tasked with completing this conquest was Publius Quintilius Varus. Varus was not a military genius. He was an administrator, a governor, a man of the law. He had previously served in Syria and had governed it with a firm, some would say heavy hand. He was competent, he was experienced, but he was also fatally overconfident. To understand Teutoburg, you need to understand a man named Arminius. And Arminius is one of the most remarkable figures in the ancient world. He was a Germanic prince of the Cherusci tribe, born around 18 BC. As a young man, he had been sent to Rome as a diplomatic hostage, a common practice used to ensure the loyalty of conquered or allied peoples. In Rome, he had been educated, trained as a Roman officer, given Roman citizenship, and risen to the rank of equestrian, the Roman knightly class. He spoke Latin, he understood Roman military doctrine, tactics, and formation. He knew exactly how a Roman army thought, moved, and fought. He had served with Roman legions on campaign. And then he went home to Germania, and he began to plan. By 9 AD, Arminius had secretly forged a coalition of Germanic tribes, peoples who were traditionally rivals and enemies, united by a single purpose, the destruction of Rome's presence east of the Rhine. He kept this coalition secret. He maintained his friendship with Varus. He attended Roman dinners, gave Roman advice, smiled Roman smiles. Varus trusted him completely. In autumn of 9 AD, Varus commanded 3 full Roman legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, along with auxiliary units, cavalry, and an enormous baggage train. In total, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 soldiers and camp followers were moving through the forests of Germania, making their way from their summer camp back toward the Rhine for winter quarters. Then Arminius brought Varus a report. A minor tribal revolt had broken out nearby. Nothing serious, just a small disturbance that needed to be put down quickly.
Varus should take his army through the Teutoburg forest. The shortcut would save time. Varus agreed. Some within the Roman camp warned him. A Cherusci nobleman named Segestes, Arminius's own father-in-law who opposed the conspiracy, reportedly told Varus that Arminius was planning a trap. Varus dismissed the warning. He believed Segestes was simply pursuing a personal grudge against his son-in-law. The Roman column entered the forest. What happened over the next 3 days was not a battle, it was systematic annihilation. The Roman column, strung out over perhaps 15 kilometers along a narrow forest track, was entirely unsuited for combat. The legion's famous disciplined formations were useless in the dense undergrowth. The cavalry had no room to maneuver. The baggage train slowed everything down. And on all sides, in the trees, on the hillsides, behind the ridges, thousands of Germanic warriors were waiting. The attack began on the first day, probably during a rainstorm that made Roman javelins, the pilum, designed to be thrown at close range, waterlogged and heavy. Germanic warriors struck from the trees in coordinated waves, then melted back into the forest before the Romans could form a proper response. The Romans took heavy casualties and barely made camp that night. On the second day, the terrain worsened, the track narrowed further. A constructed earthen wall, built in advance by Arminius's forces, funneled the Romans into a killing ground between a ridge and a marshy bog. There was nowhere to go. The Germanic attacks intensified. Roman officers tried to ouster order. They failed. The column fragmented into isolated pockets. Without formation, without the ability to use their shields and swords in coordinated fashion, individual Roman soldiers, some of the best trained infantry in the world, were killed one by one. By the third day, it was over. Varus, surrounded and facing capture, fell on his own sword. His senior officers did the same. The legions disintegrated. Survivors were taken prisoner. Many were sacrificed in Germanic religious rituals, a fact the Romans would later record with horror. A few managed to flee to Roman forts on the Rhine and raise the alarm.
3 legions, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 men, were gone. When news reached Rome, the effect was seismic. Augustus Caesar, now elderly and reportedly in declining health, was said to have been devastated. Ancient sources describe him wandering his palace, striking his head against the walls, crying out a phrase that has echoed through history for 2,000 years. "Varus, give me back my legions." The numbers 17, 18, and 19, the designations of the destroyed legions, were never used again by the Roman military. It was a mark of disgrace and grief so deep that Rome simply retired the numbers permanently. They still do not exist in the later Roman order of battle. Rome responded militarily. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson and successor, stabilized the Rhine frontier. A few years later, the general Germanicus led punitive campaigns deep into Germania, recovering 2 of the 3 lost eagle standards, the sacred symbols of the destroyed legions, and visiting the site of the disaster, where he reportedly found the bones of the dead still lying scattered across the forest floor 6 years later. But Rome never permanently conquered Germania. The Rhine remained the border, and Arminius, though he was later killed by rivals within his own tribe, had achieved something permanent. He had stopped the Roman Empire cold. The consequences of Teutoburg Forest are almost impossible to overstate. If Rome had conquered Germania, the Germanic peoples would have been Romanized, their languages replaced by Latin, their cultures absorbed into Roman civilization, as happened in Gaul, Spain, and Britain. The Germanic tribes that would later sack Rome, overrun the Western Empire, and give rise to the medieval kingdoms of Europe, the Franks, the Saxons, the Visigoths, might never have developed as distinct military and cultural forces. There would likely be no Germany as we know it. The English language, which is a Germanic language, might not exist. The entire trajectory of European history pivots on 3 legions walking into a forest and not coming out. Teutoburg Forest did not just cost Rome 20,000 soldiers, it cost Rome a continent. So what can we take from these 2 catastrophes? Because they happened 200 years apart in completely different circumstances with completely different enemies, and yet they share a common thread.
Both disasters happened because Rome was too confident. At Cannae, Rome had more men, more experience, a better reputation. It assumed that numerical superiority and aggression would be enough. It walked into a tactical trap because it could not imagine being outthought. At Teutoburg Forest, Rome had better technology, better training, centuries of military tradition. It assumed that the Germanic tribes were primitive adversaries unworthy of serious strategic caution. It walked into an ambush because it could not imagine being outmaneuvered on someone else's terrain. In both cases, the enemy understood Rome better than Rome understood itself. Hannibal had studied Roman tactics obsessively and built a battle plan that turned Roman strengths into fatal weaknesses. Arminius had lived inside Roman civilization, spoken its language, worn its uniform, and then used that knowledge to dismantle a Roman army piece by piece. The lesson of Cannae and Teutoburg Forest is not that Rome was weak. Rome was extraordinary. The lesson is that every system, no matter how powerful, has blind spots, and the most dangerous enemy is always the one who has found them. Cannae and Teutoburg Forest remain two of the most studied military events in all of human history. Military academies still analyze them, strategy textbooks still cite them, and historians still debate the details, the exact troop numbers, the precise geography, the specific sequence of events.
But what nobody debates is the scale of what happened. And what nobody can deny is the strange, haunting fact that Rome, the empire, the idea, the civilization, survived both of them. Battered, changed, forced to adapt, but alive. That resilience might be Rome's greatest achievement of all. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. We cover military history, ancient civilizations, and the stories that shaped the world we live in. And let me know in the comments, which military disaster in history do you think changed the world the most? I'll see you in the next one.